Good evening. Apologize for the late start. Okay, so welcome to our Monday Night Mysticism class, looking at the Parsha of the week through the lens of Chassidus. So this week we are starting a new Chumash of the Torah, Chumash Bamidbar, the book which tells us the various stories and accounts that took place during the wanderings of the Jewish people in the desert. The first parsha itself, the parsha that we're going to be learning this week, carries the same title of the entire book, and that is Parshas Bamidbar, meaning in the desert. And what's unique about this week's parsha is that Parshas Bamidbar is always read on the Shabbos before Chag HaShavuos, the festival which celebrates Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. Based on the teaching of the Shalah HaKadosh, that the parshas of the Shavua that we read are connected to the time of year in which they are read. So the commentaries, particularly in the writings of Chassidus, point out the connection between Parshas Bamidbar and the Yom Tov of Shavuos and Matan Torah. Indeed, some point out that just as it's customary on the Shabbos before their wedding, a chassan is called up to the Torah for an ofruf, for an aliyah. And in that Torah reading which he reads, it is this, he takes strength going into the new stage of his life as a married man. So too, we know that the day of the giving of the Torah, Chazal tell us, Yom Chasunasai, the day of Hashem's wedding, is the day of the giving of the Torah. That was the day when the cosmic marriage between Hashem and the Jewish people was forged at the foot of Har Sinai. So the parsha that we read on the Shabbos before Matan Torah is like the Shabbos Ofruf, where we look into the parsha to take lessons and to take strength as we enter into this marriage once again with Hashem, with the receiving of the Torah. So we're going to be focusing on the name of the parsha, which is in fact the name of the Chumash, the name of the book, as well as the opening pasuk. The opening pasuk tells us, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai," that Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert, ba'oil moed, in the tent of meeting, be'echad lachodesh hasheni, on the first of the second month, b'shana hashenis, in the second year, letzei sam b'yeretz Mitzrayim lemar, in the second year after they went out of Egypt, saying. So the pasuk tells us where and when these words were spoken to Moshe Rabbeinu. The pasuk goes on, the psukim go on to tell us about the census of the tribe of the Jewish people and how they would camp around the Mishkan and how they would travel in the desert. But we're going to focus on the where and when of this pasuk. The where is identified as Bamidbar Sinai. We don't usually find this elsewhere in the Torah will simply say, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemar," Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, without identifying where and when it was said. But this pasuk is very deliberate in stating Bamidbar Sinai, that this was said in the desert of Sinai. So we have to look at the idea of Bamidbar, the idea of a desert and what that represents, as well as Sinai, specifically the Sinai desert, what Sinai represents. And where did this take place? In the Oyel Moed, in the tent of meeting. And it took place on Rosh Chodesh, be'echad lachodesh hasheni. It was Rosh Chodesh Iyar, in the second year, in the year after the Exodus. So we're going to be focusing on what Chassidus tells us about the significance of the Midbar. And in a broader sense, it addresses why the Torah of all places was given in a desert. The Torah was not given to the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael once they had reached the holy, sanctified borders of the land of Israel, but was rather given in the wilderness. It was given in the Midbar on Har Sinai. And this is something which Chazal already addressed in the Medrash and in the Gemara. Chazal tell us that the reason the Torah was given in the Midbar is that the Midbar is an ownerless place. It is a Mokem Hefker. And that tells us that the Torah is accessible to every single individual, that whoever wishes to is able to come and take the Torah for themselves. Were the Torah to have been given in Eretz Yisrael was divided up amongst the tribes. And if the Torah was given in the portion of one tribe rather than the other, then that tribe could lay claim to the Torah, and other tribes could exempt themselves and say that since the Torah was not given in my portion, therefore the Torah is not for me. It is not obligatory. It's not binding. And therefore Hashem gave the Torah in a place which is ownerless and Mokem Hefker. And just like an object which is found in a Mokem Hefker, whoever takes it, it becomes theirs. So too, the Torah is free and accessible, or in the Lashon of Chazal, Kol haroitze lekabel yavoi v'yikabel, whoever wishes to can come and take the Torah if they so desire. So that's one lesson. Another lesson which is brought by Chazal, based in the Gemara in Eruvin, is that the desert represents the trait of humility. It represents the trait of bittul, humility. Just as the dust of the desert is something which is trampled on by all of the travelers who traverse it, so too, the one who approaches the study of Torah must do so with a sense of bittul, with a sense of humility that is represented by the desert. We're going to look at some of the teachings of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, as brought in the Sefer HaLikutim and in other places, explaining deeper significance to the concept of the Midbar, and to learn out from that a lesson as we ourselves head into the festival of Shavuos and the reacceptance of the Torah. The ideas that we're going to speak about revolves around a paradox, that on one hand, the Midbar represents a place of desolation. The Midbar is a place which is inhabitable. It's a place where nothing grows. It's a place where there are no people who live there in a permanent basis. It's a place of Eretz Tzia V'Oyef, in the Lashon of Tehillim. It's a parched, weary land, a land where nothing grows, a land which is not fruitful. And therefore, according to Chassidus, the desert represents the realm of the Klippos, the realm of the forces of unholiness, the realm of the forces which oppose godliness within the world. And when in the book of Devarim, when Moshe Rabbeinu describes how the Jewish people crossed the desert, it is referred to as a midbar hagadol v'hanoira, a terrible and awesome desert, a place of nachash, saraf, v'akrav, a place of snakes and vipers and scorpions. Again, these are animals which represent evil and negativity. They represent the klippos of the world. So on one hand, we've got the desert representing a place of evil, a place of negativity, and therefore we need to understand why was the Torah given in such a place which is unholy, a place which is devoid of Kedusha, devoid of the presence of man. And at the same time, as we are going to see, the desert, in fact, can represent very, very lofty godly levels. And therefore, we have this paradox. But I believe, as the Tzemach Tzedek explains, that the two sides of this paradox are actually interrelated. That it is because the Midbar represents a place of spiritual distance, because the Midbar represents a place which is spiritually barren, that is what causes us to be able to rise up and connect to the highest levels. Indeed, if we look at that chapter of Tehillim, which describes David HaMelech says that he finds himself, Be'eretz tzameh lecha nafshi, my soul thirsts for you. Like being Be'eretz tzia v'oyef, like a person who is in a desert. When a person is in a desert, that brings them to a deep thirsting for water. And we know that water is a metaphor for Torah, and it is by being in a midbar, by being in a spiritually barren and desolate place, that can be the catalyst to bring a person to a deep thirsting and yearning for connection to Hashem and connection to Torah. So in introduction, the Tzemach Tzedek points out that the word midbar, meaning desert, has the same root as the word dibur. Dibur means speech or communication. It has a mem at the beginning, medaber, which means the one who is speaking. Articulate speech, the idea of communication. So what is the significance of communication? We know that communication comes up at the very beginning of creation. Hashem created the world through 10 utterances. Now we know that Hashem does not have the form of a body and therefore has none of the functions associated with the body. Everything we use in the Torah to describe Hashem, Hashem speaks, Hashem sees, Hashem hears, are all metaphors to describe the different ways in which Hashem manifests his presence. So what is the symbolism of dibur? The idea of speech is communication to someone outside of ourselves. When we are on our own, we have no need for speech. And on the contrary, our speech is merely there to convey our deeper thoughts, ideas, and feelings. But the way we experience those ideas, feelings, and thoughts to ourselves are far more potent, are far more powerful than what we are able to encapsulate in the spoken word. In order to give over our feelings, our ideas, to somebody else, we need to condense them, we need to contract them within the finity of words in order that they become accessible to that other person. And that is the reason why we use the act of speech as a metaphor for the creative process. Because in the divine creative process, according to the works of Kabbalah, there was a tzimtzum. Hashem had to contract his infinite light in order to create and give space for finite, limited worlds. Now, whilst for us, speech is used to communicate to someone who is outside or separate to us. There was nothing outside of Hashem. There was nothing separate for Hashem. Hashem's speech created that separate reality that he could then, so to speak, communicate to. So the speech of Hashem is his power of creation, and it represents how in order to create, there needed to be a downward channeling and contracting of the divine light in order to give rise to the limited finite world. The result of that is that because creation came about through the contracting of the divine light, as the light became more concealed, more hidden, and that gave rise to the more finite and limited and separate, distinct nature of the world, that ultimately gives rise to the existence of the forces known as the chitzonim, the external forces, the forces of klippa, the forces of evil and negativity, which latch onto this residual light in order to receive their sustenance. Now that too was part of Hashem's design in creation. Hashem desired to create a physical world, and in order to give meaning to our avodah, our service in the world, he created forces that oppose godliness in order to give us the choice between good and evil and to give us a meaningful and purposeful avodah. But the only reason the forces of evil and negativity can exist is because creation took place in this manner of speech, in this manner of contraction and condensing. And that's why, says the Tzemach Tzedek, the word midbar is made up the word of daber, meaning speech, with a mem at the beginning. The mem has two forms in Torah. One is the mem, which is used at the beginning or in the middle of the word, known as a mem pesucha, an open mem, because it has an opening at the bottom. And the other is a mem stuma, final mem, which is closed off. The mem, which is added to the beginning of the word midbar, is an open mem. And what that represents is how through the creation of the world through speech, through the downward contracting of godly light to give rise to the physical world, it creates an opening. It creates an entryway through which the forces of klippa, the forces of even evil and negativity, are able to latch on and, so to speak, suckle from the divine light and to receive their nourishment and their existence. And therefore, as a result of that, our world is really a midbar. A midbar is a place which is desolate. A midbar is a place where the presence of Hashem is not openly revealed. If we take the analogy of a house, and we talk about Hashem desiring a dira b'tachtonim, a dwelling place in the world. So a house is a place where a person lives. It's a place which is settled. It's a place where a person expresses themselves. And the idea of a house, like the Beis Hamikdash, represents a place where the divine presence was open, revealed, and manifest. But a desert represents a place that is inhabitable. It is a place which is, and not, it's not a place which is hospitable. It's not a place where someone can live. And therefore it represents a place which is devoid of godliness. Not a place where godliness does not exist, but a place where Hashem's presence is completely hidden. And therefore what is revealed is these forces of evil and negativity represented by the snakes, the scorpions, etc., which are present in the desert. According to Kabbalah, this refers to the lower created worlds, the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. And as, so to speak, Hashem spoke his light to creation, as the divine light became hidden and condensed, that is in a way like the descent of the neshama into the body. The neshama up above lives in a state of complete godly experience. It is perfect in its bittul, its surrender to Hashem, and the experience of love and fear that the neshama is capable of feeling, and certainly the understanding that the neshama can understand of its creator when it is in the spiritual worlds, when it is in the heavens. But the neshama, by divine will, descends down into this world where it is completely concealed and hidden within the guf, within the physical body, and within the nefesh habahamas, the animalistic soul, which adds a further layer of concealment and blocks out the light of the neshama. And the question which Chassidus asks is, what was the purpose of such a descent? Why did the neshama have to come, mi'igra rama, from its lofty space above to descend down into such a low, coarse, concealed state of being in the confines of a body and the animalistic soul? And the answer is Yerida L'Tzoyrech Aliyah, that every descent is in order to have an ascent, in order to have an elevation that comes afterwards. And the extent of the elevation is commensurate with the extent of the descent. And that means that if the neshama had not come down here into this world and have to struggle with the concealment of the world, with the concealment and opposition of the body and the animalistic soul, it would not be able to reach the elevation that would propel it much higher from the space where it came initially. And so too, the reason Hashem created the world in a way of speech, which involves a descent and a contraction and a concealment of the divine light, is to bring about an even greater elevation and a greater actualization of the divine will of creation. And that is for Hashem to have a dir b'tachtonim, a dwelling place in this world. Why does the neshama come into this body? So Chassidus explains that the neshama itself does not need a tikkun. The neshama does not need any correction, does not need any perfection. It is already perfect. The neshama comes down here to engage with the guf and nefesh habahamis, with the soul and the animalistic soul and with the body, to subdue it and to ultimately refine and elevate, that our physicality becomes spiritual as well. And so too, the process by which the divine light comes down in order to create the world in a way that the world seems independent from Hashem, in a way where the world is a place of that is barren, a place which is filled with snakes, scorpions, representing the force of evil and negativity, is for us to engage with that world and to refine the world and to make it into a godly place. Now, what's unique about being in the desert is that being in the desert actually arouses the desire of the neshama to escape that state and to reunite with Hashem. Going back to the pasuk in Tehillim that we quoted before, David HaMelech says, "Tzama lecha nafshi," my soul thirsts for you. Kama lecha basari, my body, my flesh longs for you. Be'eretz tzia va'oyef, when I am in a parched and weary land, beli mayim, without water. And then David HaMelech says, Kain ba'kodesh chazi sicha. So too in the holy, referring to in the holy place of the Beis Hamikdash, I should see you, to see your strength, to see your glory. And Chassidus explains that what David HaMelech was saying was, Alavai ba'kodesh chazi sicha. That Alavai, if only I would desire to see you when I am in a holy place like the Beis Hamikdash, to the same extent that I yearn and long and desire you when I find myself in the desert, in a place which is spiritually barren and distant. There's an English adage that absence makes the heart grow fonder, that a distance brings out a deeper yearning from the soul. So when we find ourselves in a realm which is holy, like the neshama up above, where it is close to Hashem, at that state, the neshama does not experience a powerful yearning for Hashem, because that yearning only comes when there is an absence. When the neshama is lamaila, this absence is not felt. The neshama feels a closeness to Hashem, but it's not a deep, passionate yearning. The neshama will experience love and fear of Hashem, but it's not a deep, essential yearning, which can only be experienced when the neshama comes down here. Alavai ba'kodesh chazi sicha. Because when the neshama comes down here into this world, out of its natural state, into a place where godliness is not revealed, a place where Hashem's presence is hidden, a place where the neshama feels disconnected, a place where the neshama looks around it and is surrounded by that which is antithetical to Hashem, the forces of negativity, klippa, materialism, the body, the animalistic soul, that arouses a deep and powerful yearning and cry of the neshama to want to escape from that place and to draw close and reconnect to Hashem. And that comes about just like the thirsting. A person only thirsts for water when they don't have water, when they find themselves in a desert. So too, when the neshama finds itself in a spiritual desert, that is what triggers and arouses the yearning of the neshama that we refer to as the raivet d'chol raivin, the will of all wills, the most essential desire of the neshama to unite with Hashem, becomes revealed, but only from that place where it is surrounded by negativity, by evil. There's a pasuk which says, Mi zois oila min hamidbar. Who is this that arises from the desert? And the Mefarshim explain different references to who that refers to, but the Tzemach Tzedek says that that relates to the neshama. That through the neshama coming down into the midbar, oila, it arises and is lifted up and propelled to greater spiritual heights than it would have been otherwise able to achieve then through coming down into this world. And the same is true with the divine light that comes down into the world, that it is in order to then have an elevation, and that comes from being min hamidbar, from being in the desert. We mentioned that the Parsha refers to the desert as Midbar Sinai. What is the explanation of Sinai? So Chazal tell us that the word Sinai is related to the word sinna. Sinna means hatred or despising. And the reason Sinai is so called is because from there, Yarad Sina L'Ummay Sa'olam, the hatred of Hashem came down upon the idolatrous nations of the world. That at the time of the giving of the Torah, when Hashem revealed the mission of the Jewish people and of mankind, at that time, that goodness and holiness and purity of Torah brought with it a hatred towards the forces which oppose holiness and godliness, represented by the nations of the world who worship idols. But on a deeper level, what we're saying is that the Midbar brings to Sinai, that from the neshama being in a place which is spiritually desolate and barren, when the neshama does not experience the open revelation of godliness and instead finds itself surrounded by things which are so foreign, the forces of evil and negativity represented by the material world, that arouses the sinna, the revulsion and the despising, the hate, so to speak, of the neshama for negativity. As the Alter Rebbe describes in Tanya, the commensurate with the love that the tzaddik has for Hashem, he is moyes bara, he despises all things which are evil, all things which run against the will of Hashem. And so too, since being in the midbar arouses the ava, the deep love and yearning of the neshama to connect to Hashem, the flip side of that is that it also arouses the sinai, it arouses the sinna, the despising, the hating of the neshama towards all things which oppose and stand in the neshama's way of actualizing its connection to Hashem. When we talk about love of Hashem, there are different levels. We say this in the Shema. There is the love of b'chol levavcha, uv'chol nafshecha, and then there is the love of b'chol ma'odecha. And Chassidus explains that the b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha is a love and desire for Hashem that comes through hispoinus. It comes through meditation, through contemplation on the greatness of Hashem. And that is the experience of the neshama in Gan Eden. In Gan Eden, the neshama's mind, so to speak, is free to delve into the mysteries of the Creator and to develop feelings of love and fear of Hashem. But since that love and fear of Hashem is created by, it is therefore limited by the extent of the intellectual understanding, the hispoinus of the neshama. But the word b'chol ma'odecha, ma'od means with your very essential being. It's talking about a love which is beyond limitation, a love which is beli gevul. And that ava b'chol ma'odecha only comes through challenge. It only comes when there is a concealment, when there is a blockage. And the analogy which is given in Chassidus is that of a dam. If you have a water which flows, that water will flow with a certain level of speed and intensity. But if there is a blockage and obstruction in the presence of that water, that builds up a pressure to magnify the strength and power of the water until it eventually breaks through that obstruction and it shoots forth with far greater strength. So too, when the neshama is unchallenged, when the neshama is in the spiritual worlds, when the neshama is in a place of godly revelation, whilst it will experience the love of Hashem, it is the more limited love of b'chol levavcha or b'chol nafshecha. But when the neshama comes down into the midbar, when it comes down to a place of medaber, where Hashem's spoken word, the light of Hashem is contracted and hidden, and it appears to be a place of a lack of water, a place of snakes, scorpions, a place of evil and negativity. So that actually builds up that obstruction, that concealment, builds up the power of the yearning, the love of the neshama, until it breaks forth in an unlimited way, in a completely unlimited way, and that is b'chol ma'odecha. The idea of midbar, which we connected to the word medaber, is very much connected to the idea of tefillah, is very much connected to the idea of davening. Davening is something which we medaber. It's the way we speak. It's the idea of communication with Hashem. And the idea of davening, or the essence of davening, is that it is the service of the heart, is that it is about arousing this passionate love and desire for Hashem and a desire to escape the negativity and the evil of the world. And the Tzemach Tzedek points out that where was davening instituted? Davening was not instituted when the Jewish people were in Eretz Yisrael, when they were in Yerushalayim, when they were in the Beis HaMikdash. Davening was instituted in Galus. Davening was instituted when the Jewish people were sent into exile, because the true emotion, the true love and desire of the neshama to connect to Hashem within this world comes specifically at a time in Galus. Because when the Jewish people were in Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash was standing in its place, that was not yet the ultimate concealment. That was not a midbar. That was like being in a house, so to speak, where Hashem's presence was revealed. When the Jewish people went into Galus, then that is what triggers and brings out the true tefillah, brings out the true desire and thirsting and yearning of the neshama to reconnect to Hashem in a far greater way, and that is the aliyah, the elevation that comes dafka from the midbar. So that's another perspective on the idea of a desert, of a midbar. One of the ideas that Tzemach Tzedek shares about the significance of the midbar is based on a pasuk in the book of Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu describes the midbar as an eretz le'avar ba'ish le'yashav adam sham, a place where man has not passed, where man does not pass by, and where man does not live. And of course, that brings out the idea that the desert is a place which is not habitable. It's a place where the conditions are so harsh that a person is not able to live there. No one is able to settle there. And therefore, it represents a place where there is no man. And whilst that generally has negative connotations, therefore it's also referred to as an eretz loy zarua, a place where nothing is planted, where nothing is able to grow, nothing is able to flourish. Or as Chassidus explains the pasuk eretz loy zarua, it is a land which is planted with loy, meaning negativity and evil. So therefore the midbar represents a place which is not habitated by man in a negative sense. It's a place where the Adam is not present. Who does the Adam refer to? The Adam not only refers to us as mankind, but the Adam also refers to the Adam Ha'elyon. The Nevuah of Yechezkel describes how on the Kisei, on the divine throne, there was a maret, there was an image of the Dumus Adam, the image of man. And this Adam, known as the Adam Ha'elyon, in fact, that's why we are called Adam, because we resemble Adam Ha'elyon, we resemble the one above. The desert represents a place where not only Adam in the physical sense does not live, but the spiritual Adam, the presence of Hashem, does not live there either. Lo yeshav Adam sham, that it is a place where Adam, the Adam Ha'elyon, is not present. It's a place where the Adam Ha'elyon, the divine presence, is not revealed and does not dwell in a revealed and settled way. And therefore, this represents seemingly a spiritually negative place, as we discussed earlier. Yet at the same time, Chassidus explains that just as there is a level which is lower than Adam, that we call Loy Adam, a place where there is no man, there is also a level of godliness, which is a very lofty level of godliness, which is also referred to as Loy Adam, beyond man. Because when we talk about God using the metaphor of man, when we talk about the Mare Adam on the Kisei HaKavod, when we use the imagery of a man to describe Hashem, that is referring to the way Hashem's presence is found within the spheros of the world of Atzilus. As the Zohar says that the sphere, the attribute of Chesed, is like the right hand, Gevura is the left hand, Tiferes the torso, Netzach Choda the two legs, and of course Chachma Bin and Das represent the head, represent the intellect. So when we talk about the divine in the form of a Tziur Adam, in the form of man, the level of Adam, that is referring to the spheros that Hashem created in the world of Atzilus, through which he reflects his light into the lower worlds. But just as we are not defined, our essence is not our emotions, so too the essence of Hashem, the essence of the Or Ein Sof, transcends the intellect and emotions completely. So whereas the emotions and intellect of the divine spheres are referred to as Adam, the level of Loy Adam represents how God is infinitely beyond the spheres. It represents the essence of the Or Ein Sof, which is beyond being limited within the form represented by the Adam. And that is the level known as Raiva D'Chol Raiva. And what's unique is that whilst on the levels of Adam, within the terms and the context of the divine spheres, it is possible for there to be change from one emotion to the next. The way Hashem is beyond existence and beyond change, that is encapsulated by the level of Loy Adam. So we have two ideas over here. That when Yirmiyahu describes the midbar, the desert, as a place of Lo Yashav Adam Sham, where man does not dwell, it can be understood as a place where the divine presence is not revealed at all, because it is a place where godliness is completely concealed, and it's a place which is a shemama, a desolation, a place of the klippos, a place of the sitra achra, inhabited by snakes, scorpions, and midbar gadol v'noy, representing evil and negativity. But at the same time, from the midbar, one can access the deepest levels of godliness, the Or Ein Sof, which is also the level of Loy Adam, beyond the limitations of godliness, so to speak, in the form of Adam in terms of the spheres, which is achieved through the yearning of the neshama when the neshama comes down here into the place of concealment. And that is channeled into davening. That the davening of the neshama, the davening gives voice or words to the yearning of the neshama to reunite with its creator. Interesting, Chazal point out that the word Sinai, Samach Yud Nun Yud, has the same gematria as Sulam. Sulam refers to the ladder. When Yaakov Avinu had a dream, when he was running away from his brother Esav, he came to the Har Habayis and he has a dream of a Sulam Mutzav Arza V'Rosha Magia Hashemayma. He has a dream of a ladder which is rooted on the ground and its top extends to the heaven. And Chazal tell us, and the Zohar says, that this Sulam represents davening, because davening is a process by which through each stage of davening, we climb different rungs. There's the Psukei de Zimra, then the blessings of the Shema, culminating with the Shemana Esrei. Davening is a time where we are supposed to be oile min hamidbar, that from being in a lowly earthly environment where godliness is concealed, and that brings out the deep thirsting and yearning of the neshama to rise beyond that and connect with Hashem, we then climb these rungs of davening which take us higher and higher and higher. And that is the idea of Sinai representing the sulam of davening, and that is also the idea of midbar medaber, davening being something which is articulated as well. So if we really want to explain, on one hand, midbar can represent a place of concealment from medaber, the divine word, which comes down to become hidden within the physicality of the world, to give rise to a world which is a midbar, a place where godliness is hidden, which is uninhabited by the divine presence, a place where the klippos are dominant and prevail. But that is in order that we then are oile min ha-midbar. That brings us to a deeper yearning and thirsting and elevation from being in the midbar. And that elevation too is through medaber, through our words, through the words of davening. And therefore, says the Tzemach Tzedek, that the idea of a midbar can represent a descent, but the midbar also represents an elevation and represents the elevation from a state of concealment. That the neshama finds itself in a place of concealment where godliness is not revealed, the idea of a spiritual midbar. But from that, the neshama elevates through midaber, through the words of davening, from that state of concealment. And that is the connection, says the Tzemach Tzedek, to Rosh Chodesh. Because when Hashem spoke to Moshe at the beginning of this week's parsha, it was B'midbar Sinai, and it was Be'echad LaChodesh on the first of the month. We know that the moon is a metaphor for the sphere of Malchus, which is the divine speech. And we know that the moon also represents the Jewish people. And the moon, prior to Rosh Chodesh, becomes concealed. It becomes hidden as the light of the sun no longer shines on the surface of the moon. And that represents the descent of Malchus. It represents the descent of the divine word to become hidden within the physicality of the world. But the moment of the Moila, the moment of the rebirth of the moon, the moment of Rosh Chodesh is a time when the light of the moon starts to grow. It represents the idea of rising up from the state of concealment, just as the words of davening raise us up from the place of concealment as well. And with this, the Tzemach Tzedek connects this idea of a midbar to a pasuk we find later in the book of Devarim, where Hashem says to the Jewish people, after the Maisa of the spies of the Meraglim, Hashem says, "Bamidbar hazeh yitamu v'sham yamusu." In this place, in this desert, yitamu, you will expire and you will die there. Which, of course, seems to be a very negative thing, because to a certain extent, yitamai means to cease or to expire. When the neshama comes down into this spiritually barren place, it is a type of spiritual death for the neshama. But the word yitamu, meaning expire or to cease to be, actually has a deeper meaning as well. Yitamu comes from the word tamim, which means to be whole, to be perfect, to be complete. Furthermore, Hashem describes the Jewish people as yoinasi tamasi. You are my dove, meaning beloved to me, and tamasi, you are the one who completes me. Or as Chazal say, don't read the word as tamasi, but oimasi, you are like my twin. And therefore the word yitamu, on one hand, can represent the neshama descending down into spiritual death, a place of spiritual death like a desert. But at the same time, from Bamidbar Hazeh, Yitamu, you will achieve the ultimate spiritual elevation. You will achieve perfection, spiritual perfection, and you'll become Tamasi. You will unite with me in a state of absolute completeness. And when the pasuk says "V'sham yamusu," there you will die, it is not in a negative sense, but rather that refers to the avodah mesiras nefesh. When the neshama is down here in this world, facing the difficulties and challenges of the world, the neshama needs to serve Hashem with mesiras nefesh, which is a preparedness to sacrifice one's life to Hashem, and that is in fact a very positive thing. Or as Chazal tell us in Pirkei Avos, that once a person reaches the age of 100, it is ki'ilu meis, it's as if they have died, but avaru batu min ha'olam, and have ceased to exist from the world, which on one hand can be seen as a negative thing, but Chassidus explains it means you reach a stage where the world becomes batul to you. The world miloshen helem, the world which is a place of spiritual concealment and spiritual struggle and spiritual challenge, no longer presents any challenge, and we rise above it completely, and Yitamu, we unite with Hashem in this tremendous state of oneness. So again, this idea is encapsulated in this teaching that the Midbar represents a paradox. That on one hand, the Midbar, the desert, represents a place that is spiritually barren. It represents a descent of the neshama. It represents concealment of the divine presence. But it is dafka from that concealment that it brings out the yearning and thirsting that allows the neshama to elevate with a deep desire to unite with Hashem. And then it's able to reach a level of tamim, a level of completeness and wholeness and oneness with Hashem that it would not have otherwise been able to experience without coming down here into the place of challenge. And I think this fits very much with the entire purpose of Matan Torah. Chassidus explains that the Torah was not given to the angels, but the Torah was given down here into the world to the neshamas of the Jewish people. And not the neshamas of the Jewish people the way they are in the spiritual world, the way they are in the heavens, but to the neshamas of the Jewish people the way they are in their physical bodies, with their struggles, with their baggage, with their guf, with their nefesh abamis. Indeed, when Moshe debates the angels to prove that the place that the Torah belongs is down here in the world, he says, Klum yetzahara yesh bachem. Do you have a yetzahara? Meaning that the purpose of the Torah is to be given to a place and to a people who do have a yetzahara. The Torah is not there to remain in heaven. It's not there to remain in the house. The Torah is meant to come down into the midbar, to the lowest state of spiritual existence, to the place where godliness is completely concealed, to the place where there is the nachash representing the snake of Gan Eden, representing the Yetzirah, representing the forces of klippa, evil and negativity. Dafka there, the Torah is supposed to come, because through refining that environment, then we reach midbar, mizois oila min midbar, then we reach a greater elevation. That is where the true purpose of Torah is actualized. Another idea, we'll just finish off with this, of the idea of the midbar. So the pasuk says, "Mimidbar matana," that from the midbar Hashem gave us a matana, and of course that matana represents the Torah. The Medrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah megimul dvarim, with beshalosh dvarim, with three things, nitna haTorah, and they are with Eish, with fire, with Mayim, with water, and Bamidbar, in the desert. And these are three things which are chinam. These are three things which are free for anybody to take. They're freely accessible, and they're free for anyone to take. What is the idea of something which is chinam, something which is free? So Chassidus explains that there are godly hamshachas, there are godly lights which are earned, which are deserved through our service. But then there is what is referred to as an isarusa de la ela, an arousal that comes purely from above, which is beyond anything that we could achieve or reach or draw down through our own doing, through our own efforts. And that was the Torah. The Torah is the divine wisdom, the divine will. It is God's wisdom. The Chachmas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem and the Torah are one, and Hashem gives that to us. Hashem gave that to us. That's not something we could earn. It's not something we could deserve. It was a chinam, like the desert, which is chinam, that it is free for all. Hashem gave us this gift, which is completely free, which is beyond what we are able to achieve. And that's the significance of giving the Torah in a makam hefker, the idea of a desert. As we mentioned before, Chazal tell us that the desert, the earth of the desert, is trampled by all those who pass by. That represents the quality of humility. Indeed, as the Rebbe points out countless times in the Shemana Esrei, in our conclusion of the Amidah, we say, "V'nafshi ka'afel achol tiyeh," that my soul should be like dust before everyone. And immediately afterwards, we say, "Psach libi b'soirasecha," open up my heart to your Torah. Since the Torah is God's wisdom, which is infinitely beyond us, infinitely beyond the world, The only way we can become worthy to receive that Torah is through the trait of bittul, through humility. That when we negate ourselves, when we humble ourselves, when we surrender ourselves like the dust of the desert, like the dust of the earth, then we become a fitting space for the Torah to rest, for the divine presence to be given to us. And that is another quality represented by the desert, and therefore mimidbar matana. From the desert comes the gift. When we have the quality of the desert, when we have bittul, absolute self-nullification and surrender to Hashem, then matana, we become worthy of this free gift from Hashem, a gift which is beyond anything that we could do to earn or deserve or to achieve. So just to conclude, and I think to bring out a powerful idea, is that the purpose of Torah is very much bound up with the purpose of the neshama coming down into this world. And we often think to ourselves, what are we doing here? But on one hand, we have spiritual yearnings, cravings, aspirations. We want to study, we want to learn, we want to connect to Hashem. But we're very much in this world. We have our struggles with our bodily desires. We have our struggles with our Yetzer Hara and our temptations. And for the bulk of the day, we find ourselves in a midbar, each person in their own world. The fact that we are here, down here in this world, the fact that we find ourselves in Golus, in exile, the fact that we find ourselves in the work environments that we do, it is a place which is like a midbar. And sometimes we look around and we say that this is a midbar shemama. It's a desolate place. Lo yeshev adam sham, that the divine presence is not here. The man above is not resting in this place. It's a place where godliness is concealed. It's a place where I don't feel holy. It's a place where, so to speak, we're lost, like wanderers in the desert. But we have to take those feelings, that feeling of discomfort, that feeling that this is not where we want to be, and we need to channel that into our midbar, our midaber of our davening. We need to give voice from that pain, from that sense of distance, from that sense of absence, and then we are oila mina bidbar. Then we are able to lift ourselves up and elevate ourselves. And indeed, the Alter Rebbe says that is why the Baal Asik, the business person who finds himself deep in the midbar, has the quality and capability to daven in a far greater way than a person who finds himself in a spiritually cocooned environment, such as those who are learning Torah each day. But we should not become disheartened, because ultimately that was the purpose of the giving of the Torah. The purpose of giving the Torah was to bring God's presence not just down into the spiritual worlds, not just down into Yerushalayim, Eretz Yisrael, but into the midbar, the desert, that the desert too should bloom. The desert too should be refined. And the Rebbe said that the lesson of this is also in terms of our relationship with other Jews. That sometimes we look at another Jew who finds themselves in a spiritual midbar, that the divine word in them is completely hidden, and they're living a life which is like the desert, a life which is devoid of life and with meaning, and a life devoid of Torah, be it in their Torah study, their prayers, their observance of mitzvahs, and they find themselves in the midbar. And we may think to ourselves, what do I have to do with this person? What connection, what relationship could I have with this person where I am an observant Jew, I'm involved in the study of Torah, and this is a person who is out in the desert? The answer is that the Torah was given in the desert because it's there for every single Jew, even the Jew who spiritually is like a desert themselves. And from there, don't think that that is a descent for us, but rather on the contrary, mimidbar, matana, or oila min midbar, that will bring our elevation as well. Because just as when the neshama refines the guf, the body and the nefesh abams, and just as when the neshama refines the physicality of the world, that lifts us up from the loy adam in a negative sense to the loy adam, to the way God is beyond the tzir of Adam, the infinity of the Or Ein Sof. So too, when we reach out to a Jew who finds themselves in a midbar, and help them be oilet, to help lift them out of their spiritual desert, then that too connects us to the infinity of the Or Ein Sof, which is beyond the world, and then we'll be zoichet to the matana of Torah, the gift of Torah, which we'll receive once again this year on Shavuos, the Torah Chadash, the new dimensions of Torah that will be revealed by Moshiach, which is also connected to this idea that the only way we could reach that, the only way we can come to the deeper revelations of Torah of Moshiach is through going through the desert of this bitter exile that we find ourselves in. And from there, we'll be Oila Mina Midbar, we'll go out of the desert, we'll go out of the exile, and then we will return to Yerushalayim HaKodesh, to the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, when there will no longer be any negativity and evil in the world. The Nachash Saraf Akrav, which represents the Midbar in a negative sense, will cease to be, and then we'll have the true experience of Yitamu, of completion and perfect wholeness in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then we'll have the true revelations of the deepest teachings of Torah. B'mhei Rabbi Amen.